Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Light Christ. I know that the last thing anyone wants to hear right now is another white guy's opinion about what's happening across the country. But I need to address it, so just take this for whatever it's worth to you. I've lived in all three countries on our continent, in neighborhoods shared by diverse people from all around the world. In Canada, most of my neighbors were immigrants from India. I had close friends at school who were immigrants from China. In North Dakota, I walked home from high school with kids from the Lakota Nation. And in my first years at college, I was good friends with students from Ghana, from Uzbekistan, and from Japan. Here in Texas, I've had white friends and black friends and friends from every country in Latin America. Because of who I'm married to and the people I work with, I speak Spanish most of the day, every day. I have been really privileged throughout my life to have close friendships with all kinds of different people from all kinds of different places. But I've also seen those people suffer discrimination and racism through the comments and attitudes of my white neighbors. To be honest, at times I was part of the problem, if only because I didn't go through it myself, so I didn't understand the seriousness of what was happening to my friends. So unfortunately, racism happens to everyone. And I've seen it happen to everyone, and it's awful whenever it happens. But you know what? The only people I've ever met who are legitimately afraid that they will die if they get pulled over by the police just because of their skin color are my black brothers and sisters. Racism happens everywhere, but the cruelty and violence that goes along with racism against black people in the United States is on a whole other level. It's different, and it's worse. And a lot of people like me have had the luxury of ignoring that fact until now. But we can't ignore the ugly truth anymore. I know that Black Lives Matter offends some people because they think it's some kind of statement that black people are more important than other people. Nothing could be further from the truth. Black Lives Matter is actually a question that our black brothers and sisters and our whole country are asking ourselves right now. Do Black Lives matter like other lives? Do they matter enough that we'll see what's happening to our friends? Do they matter enough to receive justice? Do they matter enough that things will change for the next generation of children? Because even though all lives matter in theory, our actions don't actually seem to hold that up. I don't know what the solution is to this kind of problem, but I know it starts with listening. So please know that we hear your question. Do Black Lives matter? And our answer is yes. Jesus' answer is yes. And we hope that his spirit of humility and love will guide us as we figure out how to make that mean something for once. Because you matter to God. And you matter to us. David?
Good morning, everyone. We're going to be singing now. And I'm not gonna lie, I told John this morning or earlier this week that I didn't know that we should have any worship time because I didn't feel that we had songs that really worked to help us process some of the emotions and some of the thoughts and feelings that we've been experiencing over the last few weeks. But I think that, we can do the same thing that we did last week with the song Heal My Heart. I think we can continue to ask God to act. We see it a lot in the Bible, we see it in the Psalms, we see it in all the prophets. There's a time to ask God to do something, and I think this is one of those times. So we'll do that with our worship time, and I hope that we can continue to do that throughout the week, because we need that change. We need our hearts to change. We need our lives to change, and we need those changes to affect the world around us. So let's do Heal My Heart. You can give them blind back. It is you can bring the crippled to his feet, heal my feet, so I may walk the path you set among the seekers, wanderers, and the lost. Show them the light that guides my steps through the night. If you can see inside of words and still choose to forgive, then rid me of my pious pride to love the least of these. If you can see your enemies through justice, love, and peace, and give my heart the strength it needs to love my enemies. My heart is dry, my eyes are blind, my hands and feet are weak and I need your love to breathe in me and wake me to the people's need. You can heal the mute and make him speak, heal my voice, so I may speak with hope and grace, and let my hearing come before my speech. So when I speak, the words I use may build, not break. If you can raise the dead man from his grave and heal my heart, that it may be love again, and break you for the things and break your heart, so I may do the will you left for all of us. If you can see inside of words and still choose to forgive, and rid me of my pious pride to love the least of these. If you can see your enemies through justice, love, and peace, and give my heart the strength it needs to love my enemies. Our hearts are dry, our eyes are blind, our hands and feet are weak and we need your love to breathe in us and wake us to the people's need. We're gonna do a new song. This one's gonna be substantially different from some of the other ones we've done in the past, but in the same vein, the same act of asking God to act, to do something, to act. You know, we see it a lot in the Bible. We see, well, maybe not a lot, but we see it in several passages in Psalms and other in some of the prophets, we see passages of a call for God to enact vengeance, to act with judgment against his enemies. And so that's what the song is about. For those of us who have experienced anger during this time, I think a lot of times we tend to feel like we have a right to feel that. And while I'm not denying the fact that I didn't experience anger, I think a lot of times we forget that God has specifically said that our job in this earth at this time is to be peacemakers, and that he will be the one to bring judgment through his righteous anger against those who have acted in evil ways, who have surrendered themselves to evil and to destruction. And so this song is both a cry for God to act in vengeance against those who have committed their lives to evil, but it's also a recognition that we are just as capable of that evil. And if we don't look inside of us and see that and start to make changes, we can fall into the same category as those who are enemies of God. And so this song tries to do both things at the same time. And I hope that, we can sing it with a healthy heart understanding of what we're singing. And unlike some of the other songs that we've done, if you have questions about this one specifically, if there's something that you feel like maybe you don't agree with, or maybe you want to understand better, I'm always available to talk about it. So feel free to reach out. But let's try to do it. Let's try to sing this song with an open heart and with an understanding that this is both a cry for God's vengeance on those who have acted in evil ways, but also a plea for God to cleanse our hearts of the evil that is within us as well.
Justice in our lives. How long must we watch your leaders throwing baskets over lights? Righteous wrath of God, be swift upon the wicked in our land. Stand and plead, ignite a fire in us to make us see the sins that have contributed to this, and how the forge of love recast your people once again. Holy vengeance come, and let the weight of justice fall. friends that have contributed to this, and have the forge of love recast your people once again.
I was 21 when I moved to Brownwood, Texas to go to Howard Payne University. I'd never been to Brownwood or even seen the school. All I knew was that Howard Payne had a respected Christian studies department, that Dr. Gramling, the Greek professor who talked me into going, seemed like a solid guy, and that Brownwood, Texas was a lot closer to Mexico, where my fiance lived, than Wahpeton, North Dakota, where I was living then. I skipped orientation, and 2 days before classes started, I threw all my stuff into our old Jeep and set out to cross the country from top to bottom. These were the dark ages, before we had cell phones with GPS, so I charted my course with an atlas that I bought at a gas station. I grew up in Canada, and we had usually gone north for all of our family vacations, so everything south of Nebraska was new territory for me. It was a great adventure, but I cannot stress enough how little I knew about what I was getting myself into. I had no idea what the Christian Studies Department, the university, the town of Brownwood, the state of Texas, or the whole region of the southern United States would be like. But I was young and I was doing it all for a good reason. So, of course, I just hoped for the best. Classes started on Monday, and it's me, so I left on Saturday afternoon. I drove all night except for about a 2-hour nap in the car outside Kansas City. I didn't have an app to tell me the most efficient way through Texas, so I made the mistake of going through Fort Worth on Sunday at about lunchtime, which added a few hours to the trip. Once I finally got out of Fort Worth, I turned west on Interstate 20 and looked for an exit that I could take south to Brownwood. And this is where I started to have second thoughts. The road I took down to Brownwood was a 2-lane highway through wooded hills. The towns kept getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Some of them weren't much more than a blinking yellow light, a gas station, a closed Greasy Spoon restaurant, and a church. The sun went down and the deer came out, and I was pretty much alone on the road. In my headlights, everything looked dusty and abandoned, and it was hard to imagine a college town at the end of this trail. I cruised through Dublin, Proctor, Comanche, and Blanket. And every time I did, I would compare the size of their dot in the atlas with the size of Brownwood's dot. I started to worry that I was going to end up at a backwoods Bible school in a town with nothing but a convenience store, populated by people who would probably look down on me for marrying a girl from Mexico. They'd probably even make me wear a tie, and I didn't have any ties, so I was about to panic. But then I came over the last hill after Blanket, Texas, and there they were, the lights of Brownwood spread out across the valley below. I felt a flood of relief. Brownwood is not a major city, and it's not even that big of a town, but there were banks there and chain restaurants that I recognized, a Walmart, even a movie theater in the mall. It was well lit and alive, and I knew everything was probably going to be fine. A few weeks later, I had the same feeling when the bus I was riding came out of the Mexican desert and down into the well-lit Chihuahua City. I knew that I'd made it and that I was going to get to see my future wife. A few months later, back in North Dakota for Thanksgiving, I had the same feeling pulling into my family's driveway from the frozen plains, seeing our house warm and lit, knowing that my mom had a roast in the crock pot. That feeling is the hope of every traveler, to come in out of a dark and uncertain wilderness to a place that's safe and warm and well lit and full of friends. To eat, to find shelter, and to rest. That feeling is what I always think about when I read Jesus' words to the disciples. He said, "You are the light of the world. A city built on a hill cannot be hidden. No one, after lighting a lamp, puts it under a bushel basket, but on the lampstand, and it gives light to all the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven." Imagine travelers in Jesus' time, passing through deserts lit only by stars, full of lions and bandits. And imagine what they felt when they looked up and they saw their destination, a warm, safe, well-lit city on a hill, welcoming them in for shelter and rest. And now understand what Jesus is saying, that we, you and me, can be that feeling of a bright city on a hill for all the travelers who are lost, weary, and scared as they cross this desert that is our world. We, the church, the disciples of Jesus Christ, are supposed to be their safe and well-lit welcome home. And if you look at the world right now, what could possibly be more needed than that? That kind of love, that rest, that refuge. We are hurting, hungry, distrustful, and lost. Our public servants have failed to serve the public. Our cities are literally on fire. Our kids are scared. And none of us really know the way home from here. These are the kind of times that Jesus was preparing us for. The times of our world's deepest need and heartbreak. These are the times when you and me, have to decide if we are followers of Jesus Christ or something else. For the next few weeks, I want to talk about who we are and what we're for. This isn't just a sermon series or a Bible study for your own spiritual growth. I want this discussion to define who we are as a church long term, to influence the decisions that we make moving forward. And with that comes a warning. You're going to have to think differently about church than you've thought before, because Jesus didn't give us church growth strategies. He gave us a sacred calling from God to serve humanity. That calling requires compassion, dedication, and sacrifice. It's time that we stop playing around. The world needs real churches, and we need to ask, can we be one? It would take a new kind of commitment from each of us. To really be a place of refuge, it's not enough to be a city on a hill with streets and walls. The lights have to be on in every house, shining from every window. The smell of fresh bread has to come from every kitchen. Every street has to echo with song. There have to be clean rooms ready for every weary traveler to rest and recover. What I mean is that what is going on inside the city is actually far more important than where the city is or how it's organized. In the same way, if we're going to be God's big welcome home to a wounded world, our spirit is far more important than our numbers, our location, our resources, or any of the other things that we obsess over. If we're going to be who Jesus called us to be, his disciples, his church, we can't settle for being less than the people in our community who take the spirit of our calling seriously. To preach the gospel, to share the gospel, to be worthy of even handling the gospel. We have to be the people who live the gospel in the depths of our souls. Our response to Jesus' calling can't be more programs or a nice building or a marketing campaign. It has to be the light of the gospel of Jesus Christ on our faces, shining out from our own inward experience of his grace and love and peace. That will be the light in our windows, the bread in our ovens, the tables set for guests who are fresh in from the wilderness, tired and hungry and afraid. That is who we're called to be. So what I want to talk about is becoming a church that is full of the Spirit of Christ. The gospel message starts with a painful awareness of humanity's wound. The Trappist monk Thomas Merton wrote that Christianity is a religion for men who are aware that there is a deep wound, a fissure of sin that strikes down to the very heart of man's being. This wound is partly something that we were all born into, something that happened to us without our permission. The Apostle Paul writes, "Sin came into the world through one man, and death came through sin, and so death spread to all because all have sinned." But the wound is also something that we've done to ourselves. For though we knew God, we did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but we became futile in our thinking, and our senseless minds were darkened. We Christians call the wound sin, but that always brings to mind some list of rules that we've broken, which just makes God kind of sad. That image is too simple for the reality of the wound that we all carry and its consequences. The wound separates me from God. God doesn't let me tell him how reality should be, so I try to become my own God instead, and I end up with no foundation or solid ground to my being. And then I blame God for the feeling of lostness. This makes me hate myself because I know that I'm not all I could be, and I don't have the power to do what I imagine I might do. And then that makes me hate the people around me because now I'm selfish and afraid. The wound ruins me completely. The worst part is that I know I'm ruined, but without God, I don't know how to fix myself. And if you multiply my wound by 8 billion, you get a pretty sobering picture of what we are as a species. You get police officers casually killing citizens of a different skin color. You get riots across the nation. You get depression and substance abuse and domestic violence. You get people fleeing their countries by the thousands and showing up at our border with the faintest hope that things might be a little better here. You get a whole political system that only knows how to mock each other and can't fix a single thing. You get a whole world that feels like salvation is right around the corner, but a world that keeps blaming those other people over there for our need of salvation. We all know that there's a wound. Some of us pretend that it's just an illusion and that we can talk ourselves out of it with pop psychology or self-help. Some of us pretend that we can heal our wound by a few outward gestures like joining the right church, holding the right political views, achieving the right personal goals. But Christians know that the wound goes way deeper than that. In fact, we have a beautiful and mysterious and horrifying symbol for the seriousness and power of our wound. And it's Jesus Christ, God and humanity, together hanging dead on a Roman cross. Whether we understand the cross or not, if we're open to its reality and its spiritual power, it will always point us to the depth of our wound. It will always remind us that we can never talk or work our way out of our woundedness. Something bigger is going on here in each and every one of us. Of course, that doesn't mean that we don't try. Like hurt animals, we naturally try to hide our wound and live under our own power as if we're not wounded. That's what we mean by ego, the false self, the mask, the costume that we create for ourselves so that we can pretend there's no wound at the center of our being. We do this in so many ways, but every wound hiding tactic has the same effect on our souls. We end up closed. We withdraw, closed to God's love for us, closed to our own love of God, closed to the needs and love of others, closed to the truth of our wound and to anything that would actually heal it. We think that we can withdraw into fortresses that will keep us safe from pain. But of course, our wounds follow us wherever we go. Paul writes that even our religious efforts to heal ourselves only make our wound more obvious. For no human being will be justified in God's sight by deeds prescribed by the law, for through the law comes the knowledge of sin. The fortresses we build can only become lightless prisons where we end up alone with nothing but our egos and our pain. The more effort we invest in building our fortresses, the thicker we make the walls of our prison and the harder they are to escape. The more we invest in a false self, an ego that can fake not being wounded, the harder it is to actually return to reality. So we end up false, selfish, afraid, stuck, and hateful because we're wounded and we don't know what to do with it. This, and nothing less than this, is the problem that the gospel means to solve. The gospel is not about democracy or economic equality or morality or the church's influence over society. The gospel is about healing the deep psychological, emotional, spiritual wound in every human being so that we can finally become what God designed us to be in the first place. If we are going to be the church that handles the gospel, that is the work that we are called to do. The good news we preach calls all people to freedom and healing, but it also tells the truth about the cost of freedom and healing. We are set free only by recognizing that our fortresses are really prisons, by dismantling them stone by stone, by returning to face the reality of our woundedness. Then we're healed only when we stop hiding our deep wound and finally present it to God for treatment. The destruction of our fortresses and the presentation of our wounds for treatment are the same kind of thing. They are surrender. As Paul writes, surrender is the true meaning of the cross. He says, therefore, we have been buried with him by baptism into death, so that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, so we too might walk in newness of life. For whoever has died is free from sin. But if we have died with Christ, we believe that we also will live with him. Surrender means to recognize that my false self and my wound hiding will always make things worse. My only way out is to die to all of that and to finally seek help from God. And yes, that God, the one I didn't recognize as God, the one I tried to replace with myself, the one who in Jesus Christ came for me to suffer my wound with me so that I can be healed. To that God, the God I've been avoiding for so long, I must surrender. Surrender means to crucify my ego until I seek nothing and to do nothing but what is willed for me by God's love. It's only through surrender that I can be free. When I surrender, I no longer need a fortress because I have no ego to defend. That means I build no more prisons for myself. I tell the truth about what I am, and I allow myself to be open and vulnerable and wounded. And that is freedom. It's only through surrender that I can be open to love. When I surrender to the reality of my wound and learn to see the wounds in everyone else, then I can finally stop measuring worthiness in myself and in other people and simply accept the love of God for all of us because God said so, and I surrender to that. It's only through surrender that I can be healed of my wound. When I surrender, I recognize that the wound was caused when I rejected God to seek my own will for myself. When I surrender my selfish will, I recognize God as God and his will as what is truly best for me, and my wound of separation from God starts to heal. Only through surrender will I learn to worship God in spirit and in truth, to love God above all for his own sake, because he is God. And this is right where the gospel becomes a city, a community, a family, a body, something that's bigger than just me, something that includes everyone else who surrenders. Thomas Merton wrote, "Surrender is the sign of the Spirit on the chosen people of God. Surrender in the desert of emptiness where God reveals his unutterable mercy without condition and without explanation in the mystery of love." The gospel promises that a surrendered people can live a totally different kind of life together than what we're used to. This people can be identified by their authentic praise and love of God, by their deep longing for the coming of Christ, because they've surrendered to God's will in their own lives already and long to see God's will fully realized in the world because they truly believe it'll be better than what we can do on our own. This people can be recognized by their thirst for outbreaks of God's glory, his truth, his justice, and his kingdom in our world right now. We should be a people with nothing to measure, nothing to attack, nothing to defend, nothing to hate. We should be a people who have accepted the reality of our own wounds and therefore never judge the wounds we see in others with anything less than compassion. But we should also be the people who proclaim in our example, more than in our words, the possibility of freedom and of healing through surrender, through the death and rebirth of Christ. These surrendered people were the people that Jesus was talking about when he called us a city on a hill. We aren't just a city on a hill because we go by his name. For 12 verses before that, he describes the spirit that makes us a city on the hill people. And I'm going to give it to you in the straight talk of the Message version of the Bible. It goes like this. When Jesus saw his ministry drawing huge crowds, he climbed a hillside. Those who were apprenticed to him, the committed, climbed with him. Arriving at a quiet place, he sat down and taught his climbing companions. And this is what he said. "You're blessed when you're at the end of your rope. With less of you, there is more of God and his rule. You're blessed when you feel like you've lost what is most dear to you. Only then can you be embraced by the one who is most dear to you. You're blessed when you're content with just who you are, no more, no less. That's the moment you find yourself the proud owner of everything that can't be bought. You're blessed when you've worked up a good appetite for God. He's food and drink and the best meal you'll ever eat. You're blessed when you care. At the moment of being careful, you find yourselves cared for. You're blessed when you get your inside world, your mind and your heart put right. Then you can see God in the outside world. You're blessed when you can show people how to cooperate instead of compete or fight. That's when you discover who you really are and your place in God's family. You're blessed when your commitment to God provokes persecution. The persecution drives you even deeper into God's kingdom. Not only that, count yourselves blessed every time people put you down or throw you out or speak lies about you to discredit me. What it means is that the truth is too close for comfort and they are uncomfortable. You can be glad when that happens. Give a cheer even. For though they don't like it, I do. And all heaven applauds. And know that you are in good company. My prophets and witnesses have always gotten into this kind of trouble. We have to be the people who seek to embody this surrendered spirit, the death and resurrection of Christ in our worship, in our relationships, in justice and compassion for everyone we meet. We are the people who embody the kingdom of our Christ in our inner and outer conduct. When this is what we are, that's when we're people with the lights on and the table set and bread in the oven for every broken heart in our world. For some reason, church people think this kind of surrender is a personal thing, not an organizational thing. Surrender to God in your heart, but let's run church like an aggressive business. Let's be personally like Christ, but let's twist the body of Christ into something more upwardly mobile, something more capitalist, something more American. But without a complete surrender to reality, to obedience, and to the love of God at every level, from the individual to the leadership to the whole thing, the church will never fulfill her mission to transform and save humanity. And the wound and its consequences are not going anywhere. So without a surrendered church, things will continue to decline as they are already declining, uninterrupted by social programs and politics, and even the most intense kind of religious commitment. What I'm saying is that we're all in danger of doing church successfully without following Christ successfully, and that just can't be good enough for us anymore. So what do? How do we respond to the gospel, follow Christ, be set free to love and to heal humanity's wounds? How do we embody his spirit as a church? Here's how we start. We have to take the wounds seriously in ourselves and in all others. We have to stop messing around with other things. We have to fight to keep ourselves from becoming one more self-help program. We have to fight to keep from becoming self-righteous about the wounds in others. We have to remember that the wound in all of us is so serious that only the cross of Jesus Christ can heal it. And we have to remember that the people we meet are in real pain from their wound. There is no easy fix for that pain, and that only a real surrender to God can do anything about it. That means that we can't mess around with little stuff, and we can't judge others for their woundedness. We have to see every human being with the same compassion with which God sees us. The second thing is that we have to model the path to health through our own surrender. When you get into the really spiritual dimensions of human growth and healing, there's a kind of golden rule that we always have to remember. I can't give you what I haven't received first for myself. Lots of us talk about repentance without repenting. We talk about obedience to God but don't obey. We talk about faith in Jesus Christ but we don't do what he said. The first step for all of us and as a church is that we have to receive for ourselves the healing and freedom that the gospel promises. That means that we each have to surrender before we do anything else. And we have to surrender all the plans and ideas that we have for our church so that we can listen to what Christ is calling us to be and to do. Then, third, when we know the surrender of the gospel deeply in our own experience, we have to open the way to others by sharing the invitation of Christ with everyone. Yes, we need to tell his story and share his words, but mostly we need to embody his heart, his love and kindness, his justice, his death and resurrection to everyone we meet. A surrendered, humble, pure-hearted people who know with joy the experience of the gospel for themselves is what the church has to be. Only then will the weary, the lost, and the scared be drawn to the light of our city and the smell of our bread, and only then will we know how to give them refuge when they come. All of this is spirit work, so conflict with the ego starts immediately. I know that saying we should be this kind of people on the inside is not practical enough for a lot of you. You want to know how we're going to get there. You want to know how we're going to get the word out. You want to know how we're going to grow, how we're going to shine from the hilltop or the lampstand. If that's where your mind goes, I get it. But I'm humbly asking you to put all that on pause for a while and first surrender to the will of God for all of us. Surrender will never be practical or lucrative, but it is the only thing that heals the heart. And our hearts have to be healed because there is a lot of heart healing work to do in the world right now, and we can't give what we haven't received for ourselves. So just to recap, the wound is serious, surrender is the only way out, and the world needs us to go first so that we can show them the way and actually help. Next week, we're going to talk very practically about building a life of surrender. It will still be spirit work, but we're going to talk about some very real things that we can do every day to receive Christ's gift of death and rebirth for ourselves, so that others will see that in all of us and by the light of our little city, maybe find their way home to God. What I want us to do this week is to spend some time starting to surrender. Let go of all your ideas about what the church should be, what you should be, what others should be, what the world should be. And just open your soul to what God wills for us in his love. To do that, you're going to have to pray. And the short version of that prayer, the one that's easy to remember, is Jesus' simple prayer from the garden on the night he was betrayed. Not my will, O God, but your will be done. Whenever you find yourself thinking and planning and desiring and correcting this week, just stop your mind for a second and pray that prayer with all your heart. If we all do that together, our surrender as a church starts right now. I'll see you next week.